As we all know, Elden Ring has a ridiculously large weapon pool consisting of just a mediocre tally of 308 weapons. And I thought I would spark a little bit of conversation with you by going through the top 10 weapons of all time. So yes, whittling down those 308 weapons to the 10 best that you can use in Elden Ring. So of course, make sure you sit back, get comfortable, and if you happen to like any part of this video, make sure that you hit that like button down below. It helps me out a lot, and it's the quickest and easiest way to let me know that you enjoy this type of content and you want to see more. And if you're new around here or you find yourself coming back to these top 10, top 5 lists that we do every now and again, make sure that you are subscribed, and that way you'll stay up to date with all of the latest Elden Ring content. But now that that's out of the way, let's obviously jump straight into things. Of course, starting this off at the number 10 spot, we've got ourselves Morgoth's Curse Sword. Now for those of you that are OGs of the channel, you'll probably know that I absolutely love this weapon, and it in fact carried me through my first ever playthrough. So I do probably view this weapon with my rose tinted glasses on, but even when I take them off, it is still a very powerful weapon with a very decent base AR, along with an insanely useful Ash of War. Essentially, whilst everyone was using things like the Bloodhound Fang and the Rivers of Blood, I was purely relying on this bad boy to negate all of the effects of both of those weapons in a PvP sense, because you could again just use the Ash of War to run into them, stagger them, then hit them with the initial slash, and then the fiery explosions that happen afterwards. It just simply had a more unique moveset, and where it was essentially a curved greatsword, it had a lot more poise damage, a lot longer reach, and it also just looked a lot cooler too. Also throw in the mix that it had a natural bleed affinity, just allowed you to destroy pretty much 90% of the game, and even when you came up against bosses like Radagon and the Elden beasts that were resistant to bleed, you were still doing a nice healthy amount of damage with the fire damage and the base AR that the weapon had, and were breaking their poises quite often as well. Purely on those reasons alone, that's why it's perfect to put this weapon at the number 10 spot. And then swiftly moving on to the weapon at number 9, we've got ourselves the Moonveil. I still to this day believe that this is the best katana in Elden Ring. Yes, you've got things like the Uchi katana that has an insane reach. Of course, like I mentioned just a moment ago, things like the Rivers of Blood that were completely broken, but the Moonveil was essentially the best of both worlds when you compare those two katanas to the Moonveil. Again, this weapon was just an Ash of War spam fest, using the transient moonlight to either slice through the air sideways or downwards for an even stronger strike, and it was just super quick to get those moves off. Throw in the fact that this is actually an intelligence based weapon, so you can buff it with all sorts of things like Golden Vow, Terra Magica, Magic Shroud and Cracked Ear, all the magic boosting talismans. You can easily do upwards of 5,000 damage in the PvE sense, whilst also one-shotting most players in the PvP sense as well. And obviously with it being an intelligence based weapon, this allowed you to put it into all sorts of different battle mage builds, having a lot of supportive spells like the Phalanxes or the Loretta's Longbow to add range, poise damage, whatever basically was missing from the Moonveil, you could then make up for in the spells. So it was very versatile in different builds, and it still packed an absolute punch itself against pretty much any enemy you face against. The Moonveil was truly devastating and still is to this day, and like I say, I still consider it the best katana that Elden Ring has to offer, and therefore it slots very fittingly into the number 9 spot. And there's also some other important information I can slot in here as well. That is because I want to introduce you to Tune and Fairweather. And for those of you wondering who that is, or maybe it's the first time you're hearing that name, let me tell you who they are and what they do. Tune and Fairweather are a publisher of fine books, artworks, and also collective items. And specifically, they specialize in From Software works. Now, I know we don't necessarily do this a lot on my channel, but I personally am a fan of theories and exploring the storytelling that there are in the From Software games, especially Elden Ring. Tune and Fairweather have a collection of books that delve into exactly that. Just to be clear, they're not explaining the exact lore, but they delve into the different mythos and ideologies that are well known in the FromSoft community. And they've got works on literally every single game from Demon Souls to Elden Ring. So if you want to have a look, you can use my link to do so. So head over to tuneandfairweather.com/Jazza. So yep, my name, Jazza. The link, of course, will be in the description as well. Again, if you don't want the physical books, they do have a digital collection and audiobooks available, as well as some free samples. So if you just wanted to have a little bit of a taster to see what they offer, make sure that you head over there, check that out. Like I say, use my link to have access to all of the products that they have available, and if you do purchase anything using my link, you'd also be helping out the channel a bunch as well. But in the meantime, let's jump back into the top 10. So continuing on where we left off at the number 8 spot, we've got ourselves the Envoy's Longhorn. And this weapon is quite possibly one of the most fun weapons on this entire list, because there's something just extremely comedic about destroying every single enemy with bubbles. So yeah, blowing bubbles at your enemies is a viable way of defeating them in Elden Ring, and as much as it's comedic to say, it is actually extremely deadly. Now, there are 3 different horns you can get from the 3 different envoys in the game, and the Longhorn is the medium-sized horn that you can collect, but it deals the most damage. This is because when you use the Ash of War, it sprays the most amount of bubbles, potentially giving the most amount of damage output. And yes, saying that sentence out loud to myself is just so weird. Believe it or not, although you're spraying bubbles at enemies and you'd probably think that's the most fragile attack you can do in the game, it actually breaks enemy stances incredibly well. In fact, after about 2 or 3 uses of the Ash of War, you probably would have broken your enemy stance, allowing for yet another critical hit. The only reason why this weapon doesn't find itself higher in the list is because it's not the greatest against mobile enemies. So when you get later on in the game and you're trying to fight people like Horaloo or Radagon that are flying all over the show and zipping across the arena, you're just not going to be able to hit them with the bubbles, meaning that you have to just rely on the weapon itself. And in comparison, the Great Hammer just isn't the best weapon to be using. And then in which case, rather than doing 5,000-6,000 damage to an enemy, you're probably only going to be doing about 1,500. But of course, if you can time the usage of the Ash of War or find a way to make sure that every single bubble hits, you will be doing upwards of 5,000 damage. So if you can get it right, this weapon is perfect, but more often than not, you're not going to be able to hit every single enemy with every single bubble. So for me, that's why it couldn't really go any higher, but I am acknowledging the fact that you can do some catastrophic damage with this thing. And if you want something that's a little bit more reliable, then I highly suggest using the weapon we have in the number 7 spot. And that's because, for number 7, we've got ourselves Malekev's Black Blade. Now again, it's another great sword that finds its way on this list, but it is levels above in terms of damage output and versatility against every enemy in the entire game. That is because this weapon relies on Destined Death along with a catastrophic AR, with it being a greatsword. The Destined Death Ash of War will more than likely take away about a quarter of your enemy's health, because the initial effect of Destined Death takes away 10% of their health bar immediately, and then the Ash of War continues to do a flurry of attacks much like Malenia's Waterfowl attack, and with each hit you're not only just doing a base amount of damage, you are also hitting them with an attack that deals damage over time. The Ash of War also works in 3 ways, so if you've got an enemy stunned, you can hit them with the initial swing, the second strike down, and then that flurry of attack to literally do 5, 6, even maybe 7,000 damage with just that one move. And then, like I say, all of you strength users out there, including myself, will then be able to follow up by bonking our enemies round the head with the greatsword itself, doing a tremendous amount of poise damage, just basically rinse and repeating that same method. Destined Death also works on every single enemy, so that initial 10% of the health bar that it removes will always be there against every enemy that you apply it to. So it's extremely versatile, heavy hitting, and has an extremely cool weapon art as well, so that's why it finds itself at the number 7 spot. But unfortunately, the damage output of the Malekev's Black Blade is still nothing compared to the weapon we have at number 6, and that is because we've got the dual Scavenger's Curve Swords. Now, back before 1.10 was a thing, which nerfed a bunch of arcane and bleed weapons, these Scavenger Swords were capable of doing 10,000 plus damage in literal seconds. That is because they are a common weapon which you can apply any Ash of War to, and therefore change the affinity, but the weapon also had a natural bleed effect. And the reason why that's so pivotal is because you can essentially put on any blood infusion Ash of War like Seppuku or Bloody Slash, and then transform this weapon into an occult version to rinse the hell out of the arcane stat to increase your bleed build-up and the damage that you deal when you do apply the bleed. Of course, in recent times of the 1.10 update, bleed affinity weapons have been nerfed ever so slightly, but this is still capable of doing incredible numbers if you were to apply the right Ashes of War, and more so nowadays I'm actually using them with the Chilling Mist Ash of War, as I will have both Frost and bleed build up, which is essentially now the workaround to still do that 10,000 damage very, very quickly. Because you can apply essentially any affinity to these weapons, it does also make them incredibly versatile, so if you do put the frost on, you will be affecting that against every single enemy in the game. So where before we were relying so much on its bleed, we're now doing the same damage but relying on other affinities as well. The only reason why again it's not higher in the list is because you do need to utilize 2 of them, so I am being a bit cheaty in saying that you have to dual wield them, because if we were only just using one, it probably wouldn't make it into the top 10, but I realistically couldn't look past the damage output that you do with these things when you do dual wield them. And to continue on with the botchiness that is this list, I've got another weapon that you can dual wield to do an immense amount of damage. And don't worry, this is the last dual wielding weapon, but at the number 5 spot, we've got the Magma Blades. Now the Magma Blades are of course here for a similar reason as the Scavenger Curve Swords. They deal an absolute buttload of damage in very, very quick succession, but the reason as to why they pip the Scavenger Curve Swords to the 5th spot ahead of them is because it also is an insane stance breaking machine as well. This is because we can utilize the unique Ash of War, the Magma Shower, to essentially spin ourselves around, spewing lava everywhere, whilst also slicing up our enemies and doing a bunch of poise damage at the same time. Mix this in again with the dual wielding curve sword attacks that you can do when you jump or run at enemies and press L1 or LB, and you'll easily be doing 5, 6, 7,000 damage against most of your enemies, and is actually one of the most scalable weapons in the entire game, which means that even the enemies that are resistant and heavily resistant against fire damage, they will still be getting absolutely obliterated just with the base AR. Again, where you've got the Magma Shower Ash of War, you will also be dealing a lot of damage over time, because the magma will stay on the ground for about 4 or 5 seconds, meaning that you can just keep using that effect, adding more and more damage over time, and just continue to obliterate pretty much everything that you see in your path. So again, I couldn't ignore the damage output that you can do with these dual weapons, but like I mentioned, these are the only 2 dual wield weapons that feature on the list. But maybe if you wanted to see a top 5 dual weapon list, let me know in the comments if that's something you want to see. But for now, we're going to jump over into the number 4 spot, because we've got something incredible there in the Bolt of Grandsax. Now I'm just going to say this off the bat, I appreciate that this is probably the weapon that's going to cause a bit of controversy, because again, I will admit I am seeing this through my rose tinted glasses and have a whole bunch of nostalgia tied to this weapon. But again, even when I do take those glasses off, you've got one of the longest reaching weapons, both with the actual physical weapon itself as it's a spear, but more so especially when you use the Ash of War, the ancient lightning spear, which you can then hurl at your enemies. It's with the larger enemies that have specific like target areas such as their legs, body, head, you can actually target that specific area, meaning you can just constantly aim for the head, getting all of the critical hits, getting the extra damage in, all whilst doing poise damage as well. So you can keep your distance as you can hurl this thing pretty much across the map, do extra critical damage and poise damage because you're hitting most of your enemies in the head with it, and you're summoning the ancient dragon powers to infuse your weapon to just deal a mass amount of lightning damage. Yeah, this weapon's pretty damn cool, and I know it doesn't deal as much damage as the previous weapons that we've discussed, but even against the smaller enemies, so if you're wondering, oh well, I can't obviously headshot like the Crucible Knight or something, you can still actually stagger them and even knock them over with a fully charged lightning spear, and it can be quite fun just to constantly knock people on their asses. Like I say, I know it's probably a little bit controversial because I know I'm being heavily biased as this is one of my most favourite weapons to ever use, but if you need a genuine reason as to why this is so high on the list, I mean just look how satisfying it is to kill off something like a dragon by hitting it between the eyeballs with a massive spear of lightning. Yeah, I don't think I need to say any more. So with that, let's move on into the top 3, and I'm going to start things off very strongly by putting the Death's Poker in at number 3. Another weapon that is capable of doing tens of thousands of damage in very quick succession. After it was discovered, the Death's Poker very quickly became one of the most broken weapons in the game. But if you didn't know already, the Ghost Flame Ignition is one of the most powerful Ashes of War in the entire game, mainly due to the fact that you can leave a trail on it on the floor and do that multiple times. Again, if you didn't know, Ghost Flame also applies frostbite, rate. So on top of the 500, 600, 700 damage you're doing per tick that enemies walk into, you will also be dealing frost damage, and when that procs, you will then be doing even more damage to your enemies, again just adding to the levels of catastrophic damage you're doing. The idea with this is to obviously buff it to high heaven with all sorts of different magic boosting talismans, items and things like Terra Magica, and luring your enemies in to use the initial Ghost Flame Ignition to then strike them with that ball of explosion and then continue to hit them with the trail, which can actually stagger some enemies. You will of course get a nice chunk of damage dealt when you do apply that frost to them, and I'm pretty sure I've still got the recording, but even against people like Melania, you can delete half of her health bar with just one use of this thing. And this is New Game Plus 6, by the way. What other weapon can defeat her in essentially 4 moves? But again, it does suffer in the fact that you need to time it correctly and catch your enemies in that initial Ghost Flame explosion, because if you don't, enemies can dodge it and maneuver around the trail of Ghost Flame damage that's on the floor. So it is sort of a weapon that you need to master the use of, but when you do, it's extremely deadly, which is why it has to start off the top 3. But saying all that, there are 2 weapons that I think that are even better than the Death's Poker, and one of those is the weapon coming in at the number 2 spot, which is Eleonora's Pole Blade. Hands down, this is the best bleed weapon in the entire game, and the only reason why it's not really at the number 1 spot is because unfortunately it's a bleed weapon. If this had an affinity that could be applied to every single enemy, this would be easily the number 1 spot every single goddamn time. That is because it's got the unique Pole Blade charged attacks, it's got a unique Ash of War that is essentially the upgrade of Bloodhound's Fang, doing a unique spinning attack with the weapon itself, jumping forward into your enemies, slicing them apart to then jump back out to safety. The poise damage with that skill power as well is very, very good, and you will most likely break your enemy stances after 2 or 3 uses of the full Ash of War. And just the base AR and the fact that again you've got fire and bleed damage available when using this weapon just makes it extremely useful against 90% of the enemies in the game. I will say this though, out of all of the weapons that fall off at the end of the game where bleed isn't effective against most of the enemies like dragons, Radagon, etc., this weapon has the best versatility for all of the bleed weapons, like I say, utilizing the Ash of War with its base AR and high poise, along with a more versatile moveset to keep you mobile, get 1 or 2 hits in every now and again, and it's just a more usable weapon all around. It's also really easy to obtain because all you need to do is complete Yura's questline, and then you can take on Eleonora in the Outer Plateau to basically defeat her and get the blade for yourself. This means it's a pretty much early, mid-game-ish weapon. You can certainly get it before you go to Lionel Capital, and then use this to basically get you through the majority of the rest of the game, if not carry you all the way through the game, and just look like a complete badass whilst doing it. There really is little reason not to use this weapon, hence why it finds itself runner-up in the top 10 list of all time. But as much as I don't have a bad word to say about Eleonora's Pole Blade, there is of course one weapon that pips it to the top spot, and I'm going to give you 2 seconds for those of you that are fans of the channel to have your guess as to what it could be. Yep, the Dark Moon Greatsword. A weapon that has featured, and I don't know how many videos. I will throw them up all on screen because I talk about it a lot, but in all honesty, this is the weapon that I use as my go-to if I'm ever struggling in a particular fight. Let's say I haven't played the game for a little while and I'm trying to get some clips for you guys or something like that, and I need to get to a certain area. I will just whack on the Dark Moon Greatsword, have an absolute blast with it, and pretty much clear the game in like 2 or 3 hours. This is because, of course, with the Ash of War, you infuse the weapon with the Dark Moon abilities, essentially changing the usual charged heavy into a projectile. But it still keeps all of the benefits of a normal charged heavy attack with a colossal weapon. So although you're hitting them with a wave of magic, you're still doing 35 points worth of poise damage, still doing like 2,000 to 3,000 damage with each hit, freezing the enemies as well with frostbite as it's Dark Moon energy, keeping your distance because it's from range. It's perfect. It's just perfect. Also tying the fact that it's the most recent iteration of the Moonlight Greatsword that has been carried out throughout all of From Software's games, it just adds a little bonus to it for keeping the legend alive of being the ultimate weapon that you can obtain in a From Software game. Again, it's versatile against every single enemy where it's freeze damage, and of course you can turn it into a battle mage build utilizing all sorts of different spells and other overpowered attacks, and again it looks pretty damn cool. And there you have it. that is the list. Of course, this list is subjective to myself, so there's probably 1 or 2 weapons, if not maybe more, on this list that you don't agree with. Feel free to let me know in the comments down below, because like I said, I wanted to spark a bit of discussion. We've got the DLC supposedly coming out this month, and I want to know what you guys are using, what your favourite weapons are, and what are your go-tos for when that DLC eventually drops. And I just wanted to point this out once again. Obviously, I've had the huge pleasure of having Tune and Fairweather reach out to me personally to obviously let you all know about the amazing service that they provide. Their books and their collection are some of the best quality that you're ever going to find, especially when it comes to collectibles around From Software's works. So again, if you're interested in picking anything up or just having a browse on their website to see what they're about, the link is of course in the description down below, or you can look up tuneandfairweather.com/Jazza, so Jazza, and if you do happen to purchase anything whilst using that link, you also help me out, just to be abundantly clear, and you can obviously get yourself some really fascinating books delving into all sorts of different stories based around your favourite games, and also some other really cool items that they have available on the website as well. So yeah, head over there if you're interested. And other than that, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for all of your support, because things like that wouldn't be possible without you guys obviously subscribing, liking the videos, watching the videos, and just being the legends that you are. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you just for being you and being amazing. And I want to also apologise for being one of the worst YouTubers in 2024, because I've only uploaded I think once or twice this year so far, but that's because I was just struggling with a bit of an illness. You can probably still hear it in my voice at the moment, and the quality of the voiceovers weren't the best because I just sound like I was dying, which is never good, but we're a little bit better and we're continuing to get better, so the videos will start to come out a lot more frequently. I've obviously got a bunch of ideas for you guys, and obviously when the DLC drops, you better know that we're going to be covering everything that there is to offer. So if you want to stick around for all of that, make sure that you're subscribed, make sure that you stay tuned, because yeah, we will cover absolutely everything here. And if you are still listening, thank you once again. If you happen to enjoy this video, make sure you leave that like rating. Obviously let me know if you agree with this list, or if you've got other weapons that you feel should be in here. But for now, I'm going to love you and leave you, and I guess I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.